Oh, hello friends. Swampus Ratius here, and looky what I have today. It's another old and unloved tank, but this time it's of the 40k variety, and I am going to make it look pretty wild. So, this here is an old Space Wolves Rhino armoured personnel carrier thing. I rescued this from a battered old box of Space Wolves, which were found in my dad's loft, and I'm not sure exactly how old they are, but I think the box is from around 2000 to 2001. And this box was complete when he found it, but I've started messing about with some of the Space Wolves from it already. I might make a video about some of those in the future, we'll see. But anyway, our Rhino's a bit busted up. The primer from 20 years ago has mutated somewhat, and it's missing a couple of pieces too. I thought about just painting this up in the Space Wolf scheme and restoring it to its former glory, but that felt a bit too boring. So instead, I'm going to take some inspiration from the big dog Team Westwood, and I'm going to pimp this ride. I'm going to paint on some wicked flames at the side and whack on a silly amount of guns. I'll probably install a PlayStation 2 in the back of it as well. So, for my first job, you'll see we have some quite big gaps down the sides here, and the glue that had once held these together has long dried off and dissipated. I can't remember if there's supposed to be a gap between the main body and the track housing here on the side, but the cockpit does seem to have a slight angle, suggesting the gap here is intentional. So with that being the case, I'll just do my best to stick these little flappy bits down, and I'll fill in the gaps with a bit of sprue glue. I try as best I can to squelch some sprue glue into the gaps, and then I shove in some random stirrers, lollipop sticks and a toothpick to help compress the pieces together while they dry. For the back here, I just hold it in place until it's set. A tiny little mini clamp would have come in handy here actually. These bits don't need to be perfect, just enough to get rid of the most visible gaps. And while that's drying, I take the opportunity to prepare a little bit of weaponry for our Rhino. In my last video, I used some leftover Cadian bits, and today, I'm using some more leftover Cadian bits. Also, sometimes less is more, but in this case, more is more, so we're not going to skimp on the amount of guns we're adding. I have a quick sort through some leftovers, and in the end, I'm thinking of adding these 2 bazookas, 2 mortars, 2 machine guns, and these 2 big old boys. I used some blue tack to find the positioning I'll be happy with. Yep, looking good. And then stick them on using a bit of super glue. I glue a bazooka here in place of the missing exhaust pipe, and I don't manage to get any of the remaining guns on perfectly straight, but once they're all on, I'm feeling pretty good about it. It's evolving from a little unarmed baby Rhino into a big old tanky wrecking machine. And are these mortars on the back, or are they some more massive fat exhaust? Who knows, they can be whatever you want. But they're mortars, so they can only really be what you want if you want them to be mortars, okay? Anyway, I'll get this primed and we'll be back faster than I can say, but oh, we're back! Now I've got this primed, I'm seeing a lot of the imperfections from that old primer which has dried out and mutated over the years. This is another classic situation of I should have fixed this before I started painting, but oh well. I'll try to fix it now instead by sanding down the worst areas with a fine sandpaper and then reapplying the primer. You know what, there may come a day when I complete a video with a thorough, well thought out, rigorously structured game plan.
But it is not this day!
Also, I think the texture on these hatch bits is intentional because they both have it in the same places, so I think I'll leave that on. Once I reapply the primer, you can see that it's not perfect and some bits of texture still remain, but I've got rid of the worst bits and I think that's as good as it will get for now. So, on to the painting. As I mentioned briefly at the beginning of this video, I plan to paint some wicked cheesy flames at the side of this bad boy. So first I'm going to paint on a base coat for these areas using some Ulthuan grey. I'm going to be painting the main body with a dark purple colour, so it'll be best to base coat this area now with a lighter colour to help make the flames pop and also help me to know where to avoid painting purple later. If I painted the flames onto the purple, they wouldn't be as vibrant, so we're trying to learn from our previous mistakes and use just a smidge of foresight. 2 coats of this and it's looking a bit random, but you can probably see what I'm going for. On to the next step. For the main body of the Rhino, I'm going to use a splash of some Xerius purple, and while I get started on this, I'm debating whether I'll paint the track housing sections on the side here in the same purple, or use another colour to get an even more ridiculous Pimp My Ride style paint job going. I'm not 100% sure at this point, but for now I'll paint up these other details including the side hatches, the linings around these vents, and the little storage box things back here. I'll go for 2 coats of this and then decide I will in fact use a different colour on the sides. What a wild and wacky turn of events. Whoa! So anyway, let's get to that. Now, I'm not certain whether this will actually look good, but we're going to use some Screamer paint to paint on the side mounts for these tracks. There's a chance that this will be way too much when combined with the purple, but that might not be the worst thing, especially for this Pimp My Ride extravaganza. After 1 coat, it's looking a little weird, but I think it has potential. It will probably look better once I've given it another coat and painted on the remaining grey bits. So I think we'll stick it out for now. And if it looks bad once the rest is painted, I'll just paint over it. That's the good thing about painting. You could just paint over your mistakes. My parents tried to paint over me. Also, I just realised these are the same colours I used when painting my first Space Marine. Maybe these colours just look really great together. Or maybe I just don't have much imagination and like to use the same colours over and over again. Maybe the sky's not really blue. Maybe I will have 2 Kievs for dinner tonight. Next off, we're undercoating our metallic sections in the same way we always do. I use black for the pieces which I plan to give a silvery metallic colour later, and I feel I wouldn't be giving it the true Pimp My Ride experience if I didn't have some gloriously cheesy gold accent colours dotted about. So, for these pieces, I'll use some dried bark for the undercoat, since brown seems to be the best undercoat colour to give a good solid gold metallic sheen. And you've probably noticed I'm not being very neat here, and I'm not too bothered about that. I just slap it on as I'll be able to tidy it up at the end. This is an example of one of those times where cleaning it up at the end is way quicker and more efficient than trying to paint it all on perfectly in the first place. That's what I'm telling myself anyway. Ugh, I've just reached that point at the paint job that can often happen, where the mini looks like complete rubbish to me. I'm questioning why I chose this paint scheme. My motivation to continue is low. I feel like I've messed up and I'm re-evaluating all my life choices up until this point. This happens when painting. Even when the idea is crystal clear in your head, there will almost always be a time in the process where the miniature is looking kind of awful and you just want to give up and go paint something else. But we don't give up because we know it will look way better once it's finished. And even if it doesn't, who cares? You just painted a mini and probably had fun doing it. So, with our brief crisis interlude over, we're back to the metallic sections to try and start bringing this Rhino together. I'm hitting the barrels and the bodies of all our big machine guns with some lead belcher first, and I wipe out the majority of the paint from my brush just so it's not wet. I then just caress the metallic pieces lightly to build up the metallic colour whilst keeping the shadows from the undercoat intact. And then I carry on with the lead belcher painted in the grates on the sides of the track housing, the exhaust pipes, and also these little panelling bits holding the sides together. And once that's done, I bring out some gold leaf from Tamiya for all of our undercoated brown sections. I tried to use this in another video a little while ago, but it sealed itself shut and was resistant to the intense 10-year-old like strength that I wield. I did, however, manage to get it open this time by running it under hot water for a minute or two. And it's a really nice gold paint actually. Tamiya paints can behave a little weirdly though, as I think they're alcohol based and they have a much shorter working time. So you need to get this stuff on quickly and try not to touch it again till it's dry. I have to give 2 coats of this in the end because I thinned it down slightly too much. But once it's dry, it looks pretty good. And now with the metallic sections metalliced, I'll get the rest of the coloured parts of these guns added. I paint these using the colours from the body of the Rhino, so Xerius purple for the 2 middle guns and the little bazooka on top. Screamer pink for the big old boys on the sides, and also for the base mounts of these mortars turned exhaust pipes. And finally, the bazooka on the side here will also get a little lick of the purple, as well as the mortar tubes. And with that, all of our base coats are on, so it's time to whip around a few washes and add some highlights, before I paint on the wicked sick Pimp My Ride style flames on the sides. Yo dog, I heard you love purple, so I have some purple to put on your purple, so you can purple while you purple. That's some real Pimp My Ride baby. So yeah, I'm using some Drucci Violet here to wash the purple details. And I slather it all over the non-metallic sections of the guns and bazookas, and apply it around the edges of any Xerius purple or Screamer pink pieces. I don't apply this to the large flat areas, since washes tend to pool and look a bit messy when they dry there, but I'll whack it on any of the small flat pieces with details to catch the wash.
Next, I'm using Agrak Surf Shade on all of our pimped out golden pieces to give them some nice rich dark shadows, and adding it to these little bits here was my favourite part. Ooh yeah, look at those little bullet casings, baby. And of course, the moment millions of people around the world have been waiting for, the return of the big dog. He's here, it's the one and only Nonus Oileus getting whacked on to all the remaining metallic sections. Once all those washes have dried, I go around the Rhino and use the original colours to touch up any areas where I've applied too much wash or where it's spilled over into other sections, getting them all ready for the beautification coming up next. So, it's looking pretty cool already if you ask me, but as mentioned, it's time to add a few extra touches before we add those wicked sick Pimp My Ride bad boy rootin' tootin' cowboy rockin' sockin' flames. So I make a start by adding some edge highlights on my one eye, one horn flying purple people portions by using a little bit of Gene Stealer purple. I use a very fine brush for this to avoid over applying it, as that would end up looking pretty nasty and give us more cleanup work to do. I do my best to go around adding a fine highlight to any edges on the hatch doors, the main body, and to the assortment of attached weapons. And I'm feeling a bit ill and a little bit fatigued at this point, so they don't all go on as neatly as I hoped, but they look alright. Now for our Screamer Pink sections, I'll add some highlights using Emperor's Children Pink. And again, I have to make sure I'm only applying a very small amount of this, as slapping it on too thickly will contrast a bit too much with the Screamer Pink and look a bit off. By applying a nice thin layer of this, I'm left with quite a muted highlight that blends in fairly well with the rest of the paint job, but still distinguishes each section from one another. Once I've added a satisfactory number of edge highlights, I'm ready to give the metallic sections a quick shine up too. The metallic sections get a super quick touch up with some Stormhost Silver to add a little extra shimmer and shine, or shimmer and sheen, shimmer and sparkle, I don't know, whatever, take your pick. I use this to add a little highlight on the gold parts too, but now that I'm watching this back, I'm questioning that choice a little bit. I'm not sure if I would use the same colour for the gold in future, as it's a bit too much of a colour difference, but we live and learn. And now it is finally time to get started on those Pimp My Ride super cheesy, super cool flames on the Rhino here. I've picked this selection of colours as I think it will provide a nice colour gradient for the flames, so let's get stuck in. It won't surprise you that I don't have a good plan for painting on these flames. I'm basically going to add layers using our colour selection progressively and see how that turns out. Moondust is the first of these colours to add the brightest yellow portion towards the bottom of the flame area, and I'm not using a great deal of this, just a little tickle around the bottom edges. Demonic Yellow is our next paint to start building up these flame colours, as it acts as a good intermediary between the paler Moondust and the Troll Slayer Orange I'll use for my next coat. And I'm not really sure what to say here, guys. This isn't a well thought out flame tutorial. This is just a random guy in his bedroom painting an old Warhammer tank in a pretty ridiculous style. So I'm just going with my instincts and I'm adding an amount of paint that looks good to me in the moment. This is actually the first time I've ever tried to freehand flames. Usually if I'm painting fire, it's on a torch or something else which has a physical structure that can help you in determining where to add your different colours. But here, I'm just whacking them onto a flat surface and trying to create the illusion of flames myself, which is making it a bit more difficult. Anyway, I'm rambling. I've been using Troll Slayer Orange for this step, and I'll be moving on to the reds now. By the time I was adding the Wild Rider red, I realised that a kind of half stipple, half stroke was working the best for giving indiscriminate flame shapes that would kind of blend together in a way that looked natural. Natural things like flames have very random and ununiform shapes, but humans often deal with patterns and uniformity. So I tried to use this half stipple, half stroke technique for the rest of the paint job to avoid ending up with a bunch of orange, red and yellow triangles instead of flames. Evil Sun Scarlet was the final colour I used, and I was really starting to enjoy the process when I got here. The darker red towards the top of the flames seemed to really pull things together and give a much more flame-like appearance. But we still had quite a ways to go before they were looking how I imagined in my head before starting this project. Once I had been all the way around with all the layer colours, I then worked back around, and this time I would just use my colours randomly to try and blend the layers together in a way that looked fiery. I wish I could give you guys a super specific description of how this went down, but it was more or less making it up as I went along, A little bit of yellow here, a splush of red there, and maybe some orange flung on all the way over there. I also realised while doing this that adding some little yellow streaks onto the darker parts of the flame gives it a bit more of a realistic look. So I started incorporating these into it as well, and not just isolating the yellow towards the bottom of the flames as I had been doing. And I have to admit that I did start to get a bit annoyed at one point, because it just wasn't looking up to scratch for me. Some of the layers looked a bit messy and horrible and were far from what I had envisioned. But I realised I would never get it to be perfect. Perfection doesn't really exist, so instead I would do what I could to make them look good and then call it a day. So I let my brush channel my inner flame and got to work finishing this bad boy off. More random flecks of our flame colours here and there, more tidying up of layers that dried dirty, and more uncontrollable hand cramps from clutching onto my brush for so long. And with that, I was finished. Except, actually, I wasn't, because I needed to paint these tracks on quickly. I knew I'd forgotten something. A quick bit of Abaddon black, and then a dry brush of Mechanicus standard grey on the raised bits is enough to give these a track-like flavour. And will I paint the bottom of these tracks, or just the areas that are visible? Find out in the next season of Pokemon Paint Party. You got to pimp my ride. Get ready. Tonight, we're gonna make this. Alright, that's not it. What is it? You got. What is it? You gotta pimp my ride. Whatever. I don't know. Just go and, watch the Pimp My Ride theme tune as you watch this baby spin here in all its cheesy glory. As a whole, I'm pretty pleased with this actually. Take a look at how it started compared to what it looks like now, and you can see that we've done a good bit of work on it. It's still a bit rough around the edges in some places, but for once I can attribute at least a little part of that to its age and the poor condition it started in, with its weird little fungal primer and everything else it had going on. And you definitely wouldn't see this in your average 40k army, for good reasons really, because it looks absolutely bonkers. But it still looks pretty cool, right? You guys? I'm reasonably happy with how the flames came out, but not completely satisfied. They still look a bit off in places and haven't gone on as cleanly as I would have hoped. But overall, from a tabletop distance at least, they look pretty decent. As I mentioned before, this was the first time I ever tried to freehand flames like this, and found it a little difficult to get good organic flame shapes and the right balance of colours. I felt I was getting the hang of it a bit towards the end, but by that point there was only so much I could do to repair the damage done with my previous messy layers. I probably should have practiced these before going straight onto the model, but hey ho, another lesson learned. They can't all be masterpieces, and at least next time I'll have a better understanding of how to paint flames. It's not often that I paint ridiculous things like this. Usually it's all about trying to make things look all moody or realistic, so this was a really nice change of pace. It was a good reminder that this hobby is about having fun, and not just painting stuff up to look like the original grim dark box art. After having this much fun painting the Rhino up like this, I might have to do some more silly Pimp My Ride style paint jobs in the future, so there's at least a small chance you'll see a video like this again on the channel. And next time, I might be feeling some nice bright lime green paint with some spinner rims. Who knows? Anyway, thanks for watching, see you soon.